Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome back to Pada Spotlight. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for being with us today. And today I'm very pleased to have our Pada Spotlight with our member, Expedia Group Media Solution. And the topic we are going to cover today is Insight Solution for Travel Recovery. I am Sarudane Swan. I'm a Director of Membership Relations at PATA, and I will be your host for today's. And with today's, I'm very pleased to have our guest speaker who are with us today, Mr. Andrew van der Feltz, Global Senior Director and Business Development at Expedia, as well as Mr. Richard Kocher, Global Director and Media Insights and Planning at Expedia. And with this presentation, what you're going to learn is how the destination and travel brand can use data and digital marketing tools to reignite the demand. And after the presentation today, this will follow by panel discussion, which will moderate by my colleagues, Mr. Paul Brangan, our Director of Communication and External Affairs at PATA. With this, if you have any question for our speaker, you may submit your question in Q&A box, and Paul will help ask our speaker during Q&A session. In addition, a copy of presentation from today will be shared to PATA HQ members who are attend the webinar in live only. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Andrew van der Feltz. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. So if you can hear me, just a thumbs up so I know. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I believe my colleague Richard will be driving the slides, so I will rely on him to do so.
Yeah, just want to do a quick check on, can you hear me, everyone? See my video as well? Excellent. I'm going to share the screen, Andy.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. Whilst Richard's doing that, just as a quick introduction, we've done a few of these presentations, and actually the last one I did yesterday for Focusrite, recording for Focusrite in Europe. We know, and many of you will also know as well, that we are going through some pretty interesting times in the last sort of 16, 18 months. And things are progressing in different parts of the world at different speeds. Even within the Asia Pacific region, there are areas that are starting to progress a little quicker than others, and obviously some plans which are starting to emerge. Only this morning I heard a little bit more again about the renegotiation, the re-talks around the Singapore Hong Kong bubble. We've obviously got the Tasmanian bubble. So there are pockets of progress here and there, whilst others are still going through, and not just in Asia Pacific, but also globally in EMEA, going through also sort of ups and downs when legislation leads to destinations going back onto certain lists, amber lists, for example, or red lists. So it's a very, I would say, dynamic, but also very uncertain path forward. And what we rely heavily on is data, and that's what we want to do today primarily, is to talk through what the insights and trends that we see throughout the world, but also more specifically around the APAC region. And then from that, take us into how do we utilize that insights data, how do we share that with you as our strategic partners, and then how do we create ways of engaging. Because the one thing is very clear, and I'll touch on that a little later on as well, is consumers, travelers have not stopped searching, dreaming specifically, but also booking. And believe it or not, and we're all travelers, we're all very opportunistic. We'll touch on that as well. And travelers, as well as actually the industry partners, have been very opportunistic over the last 12 months for sure, finding those pockets, trying to engage with consumers when those pockets opened up. So we'll touch on that a little bit. But before that, just quick introduction of myself. Rich, if we go to the next one. Name's Andrew van der Feltz, and I've been with Expedia Media Solutions for the last 5 years. It's not going through. Oh, there we go. Prior to that, I've got just over 2 decades of working with national DMOs, predominantly the Dutch National Tourism Board and BTC, and the Visit Scotland prior to that. So a deep history in destination management, destination promotion, and the last 5 years working very much in the digital sphere around that. So enough about myself. If I then go and talk a little bit about, and we go to the next slide, ourselves in terms of media solutions. So Expedia Media Solutions, we are effectively the digital advertising publishing arm of the Expedia Group. So effectively, we have the ability to engage with and talk with millions of, hundreds of millions, in fact, of travel shoppers globally on our platforms, but also our audience off of our platforms as well. So effectively, you see us as a media specialist in the travel industry as such. Not only are we working obviously for our own, and we go to the next slide, Rich, we're not only working for ourselves in terms of Expedia Group, but we work very closely for the recovery of the industry as a whole. It's obviously, we firmly believe that rising tides help all boats rise as a result. So we work very, very closely with different associations. We've just recently joined, obviously, PATA after a number of years. We're members of the UNWTO, UNESCO, WTTC, ETC as well. So it is in our interest to help drive that recovery. It is in the interest of the industry as a whole to have us working alongside of that. And it's very much rooted in what we do. And it's about driving the industry back to recovery. With that said, we utilize, I mentioned right at the beginning, data as a main driver for our insights, but also in terms of helping us drive strategy. It comes from two main sources. We will focus predominantly today on first-party data, but we also utilize very often third-party data. We commission research every year to have a little bit more insight into the intent behind the behaviors that we see our customers do on our platform. So you can imagine millions of points of data. In fact, we have 300 petabytes of data at our disposal. That's a new one on me. Recently, had to look it up. Just to give you some context, 10 million photos uploaded onto Facebook, as an example, is 1.5 petabytes. So you can imagine the amount of data that we have in terms of just travel. We are the travel experts. In that sense, you know, people who come to our site, the millions, the hundreds of millions are coming, are travel interested. It's not an ecosystem where you have to try and find these travelers. They are there. The heavy lifting's already been done. We've brought these consumers to our platforms, and they're leaving a lot of information about their behaviors on our platforms, which we would keenly share and want to share with our partners. I'm going to hand over to an industry expert around insights, trends, data, and that's my very, very dear colleague, Richard Kocher, who's going to lead you through the top line. He's not going to take you through all 300 petabytes, I hope, but certainly the top elements of what we're seeing in trends and data. Richard.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, so my team oversee traveler insights for media solutions. We're constantly mining the vast data set that Andy referenced, those 300 petabytes, spanning multiple markets and years of customer touch points. And, you know, as Andy mentioned, literally billions, millions of touch points. And we're using these to unearth booking and search trends from across Expedia Group sites. And what's exciting about this is it allows us to capture a moment in time and tell up-to-the-minute stories of how, when, and where the world is traveling. And this is something which has proved particularly valuable during the past year in our attempts to navigate the uncertainty of the COVID pandemic. These insights have also been vital for informing the advertising campaign strategies of partners looking to recover from the pandemic and reignite demand among their target feeder markets and audiences. I'm based in London. I'd been with Expedia Group and Media Solutions for over 10 years, leading various business development and account management teams before having the opportunity in 2015 to start the media insights and planning team. The team has expanded from there, really. So first we went global and established expertise in all regions, so North America, LATAM, EMEA, and of course, APAC. And then step by step, we've been building our capabilities to improve our access to data, go deeper with data, find new sources of data, and ultimately tell richer and more insightful stories about the ever-changing world of travel. I'll hand back to Andy in a little while, and he'll share how partners are working with Media Solutions on their COVID recovery strategies. But before that, I'd like to walk through some of the key themes surfacing in our data and featured in our recent Q1 travel trend recovery reports. This will be available to all of you at the end of the call via a downloadable link. Key takeaways include how demand for travel continues to fluctuate in line with changes to COVID restrictions and increasing vaccine penetration at the country level, and how travel partners must be prepared and ready to respond to these fluctuations. How the steady vaccine rollout in other super regions is leading to a growing confidence in traveling again, which we believe, despite continued uncertainty, is a positive signal for recovery in the APAC region. How cleanliness and hygiene, dominant themes for travel in the past year, are very much still on the minds of our customers. And finally, how vacation rental properties have been and continue to offer travelers alternative opportunities for travel accommodation. So there's quite a bit in there, and a lot of this you'll be able to access via our downloadable reports available at the end of the presentation. This is a view of Q1 global search data, split by destination super region. However, the ups and downs and steeply curved fluctuations, while we've seen them in Q1, is very much the story of 2020. It really was stop-start for all regions, and demand for travel ebbed and flowed as country restrictions tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. Such volatility really highlights the elastic nature of the travel business and consumer demand, more of which we'll cover in a moment. Early 2021, demand saw a reasonable uptick on 2020, but despite some bright spots and optimism for the future, again, we'll share a bit more in a moment, the situation in APAC has been a little more muted. So breaking demand into domestic versus international searches, we get a more granular view of the situation. Domestic is defined as searching, booking, flying and or staying within a traveler's home country, versus international, which is where we see the equivalent actions, but for another country within or outside of a traveler's immediate super region. The picture is seen here is that domestic travel, both globally and within APAC, has shown less volatility than international, which, as one would expect, has been constrained by frequent and widespread border closures. As I'm sure many of you have seen in your own data, it was domestic last year, which was arguably behind some of those glimmers of recovery that we saw from time to time for the travel industry. So coming back to this idea of travel demand being more elastic than ever, like a rubber band which tightens and then springs into life when released, we've seen travelers respond with urgency and intent when travel restrictions are loosened. This is evident across three phases of recovery as travelers respond to breaking news at the domestic level, the intra-APAC level, and the international level. Each of these phases could arguably be standalone, and of course, throughout any normal year would be standalone. But in the recovery phases of COVID, we see it as being likely sequential. So domestic demand comes back first, followed by intra-APAC, and ultimately international. So think about these three phases, an agile framework for how your destination can respond to returning demand and drive recovery in tourism. And Andy will touch on a few of these items in a moment. Readiness to meet this demand in its various forms is absolutely key. And as I say, Andy will talk more in a moment on that. As you may have seen with your own destinations, demand for places with on-off lockdowns, so Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, Australia, and in this case, Malaysia, is very elastic. If we look at data from midway through 2020, we can see a big jump in weekly domestic searches for the country. So you can see there sort of 7th of June, 8th of June. And this was following breaking news that Malaysians were allowed to travel again across the country without restrictions. So this idea of elastic band tightening and then loosening and springing into life, you can very much see on this slide here with regards to Malaysia. The evolving picture of intra-APAC, so country-to-country travel bubbles or corridors, is also fueling demand and appeasing travelers looking to fly again. We've seen some on-off situations with Singapore and Hong Kong, but the most recent Trans-Tasman bubble, as seen here, and again, as referenced by Andy later, has seen demand pick up for Australians searching and booking New Zealand, and vice versa for New Zealanders searching Australia. And international too, despite feeling unattainable for travelers a year ago, will come back and is coming back. Here we see users of Expedia Group's global sites springing into life and searching for Phuket the moment Thailand announced details of the sandbox model to facilitate travel to the country for fully vaccinated travelers. And in fact, I saw an article this week that was shared by a member of my team from Bloomberg, citing how the sandbox model could very much be that framework that other vacation hotspots, not just in APAC, but globally, are looking to take on to drive demand. And really, vaccines are the key to all types of travel coming back, but particularly international. For many destinations globally, we're seeing search and booking demand grow with increasing vaccine penetration. And that's particularly true in North America. Searches for both domestic and international travel have been spiking with breaking news of vaccine availability and the resultant rapid rollout of vaccines across all states. And this, I would say, bodes well for the APAC region. So one, it is a sign that confidence in travel builds with vaccine rollouts. And two, as we see here, and focus on the slightly thicker turquoise line, I think it's turquoise, you can see here how searches for APAC, week commencing the 15th of March, spiked most for customers based in North America. Now, this strongly indicates that our customers in recovering feeder markets where vaccines are widespread and increasing in penetration are driving customers to dream about travel again in a way that we knew it before COVID. And with this vaccine confidence, it's inspiring them to think long haul and to look for those once in a lifetime bucket list destinations, which we know are catered very, very well by the APAC region. Here we see a snapshot of APAC-based destinations, everywhere from the Maldives to Vanuatu, featured as answers to a question we asked global travelers during last year's campaign, where will you go when travel returns? Here you see a snapshot of the campaign, which was launched in the middle of the pandemic and saw tens of thousands of visitors showing a real desire for wanderlust travel. So two further points from me before I hand back to Andy. So one, health and hygiene really does matter to travelers. And here we see how mentions of cleanliness and hygiene in Expedia Group travel reviews, hotel reviews, jumped by 30% from February to March last year at the beginning of the pandemic. And this frequency has stayed consistent right through into 2021. So managing and communicating protocols for cleanliness and hygiene, but crucially balancing that messaging with what makes your destination attractive to travelers continue to be essential to marketing efforts and destination management. And secondly, my final point, vacation rentals have had a strong year during the pandemic as customers have sought longer stays, often combining work from home and leisure in more spacious alternative accommodation. Globally, we've seen this across multiple destinations, particularly strong domestic demand in North America. But here we see evidence in the Australia market with Australians searching for vacation rentals on our vacation rentals property site, Stays Australia. I'll now hand back to Andy, who will wrap things up.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. And yes, that campaign last year, remember, where will you travel where will you go next when travel returns, was a fantastic campaign, which did bring to light one key thing here, which I mentioned at the beginning, and that is obviously people never stopped about dreaming about taking vacations, and that pent-up demand very much out there, and that pent-up demand, as soon as it's given an opportunity to be freed, we've seen that, and I'll touch on a couple of initiatives here and examples where that pent-up demand needs somewhere to go. So my point is, like, going dark is never was an option. And during this entire pandemic period, destinations, governments that were keen on remaining visible, whether people were able to travel or not, are the ones that have really captured a lot of that imagination and maintained top of mind in a lot of people's travelers' minds as well. So what we've also seen in these seismic shifts in different places is that we've seen that a lot of the travelers have now gone more online than before. It's become far more digital in that sense. So 24% are more likely to also go through an online travel agency for finding that inspiration. 20%, interestingly, actually for DMO. So this is, great. And having been and worked in a DMO for a number of years, that's something which they strive for. So it's great that actually travelers are now also going to DMO sites to find that inspiration. And then finally, 16% higher is the number of travelers who are inspired by travel advertising. So we've always known that travel advertising works. It sort of interrupts the thought process, or enriches the thought process of people when they're looking for destinations and places for their vacation. So from that perspective, digitalization is certainly moving forward, and not just OTAs for an inspirational point of view, but also from a booking. We've seen in recent studies as well that up to 50% of consumers who are traveling are utilizing OTAs since the pandemic for making those reservations. Yes, there's still 33% that want to go direct, and a further 17% that will go through the high street agencies. And again, we have that reach to those agencies as well. So if we go to the next slide, as I mentioned earlier on, going dark is not really and never has been an option. And it's always about trying to engage with that travel shopper. Normality, as we know it from pre-pandemic, I don't think will be with us anytime soon. And we need to adapt and continue to adapt to the situation. Fantastic examples of that happening in Thailand, for example, or the sandbox ideas for Phuket. If we go to the next slide, I also want to, I'm conscious of time and aware that we have time for Q&A as well, but I wanted to really touch on this whole concept and idea and thinking around this this growth or resurgence of when there is suddenly an interest from the travel industry for a destination, and when that bubble opens up. And in the case here of the Tasmanian bubble, what we really saw on our platforms is, a staggering 1,770% lift. So just to the point which Rich was making earlier on with Malaysia as an example, is as soon as there is even the slightest sniff of an opportunity, this pent-up demand needs to find a way out. And this is where we're seeing these staggering percentages, not only in APAC, but we've seen it time and time again also in EMEA, especially during last year, but even at the beginning of this year as well, as we started opening up corridors. So it is led to a great extent by the vaccine rollouts, but it's also led to a second extent by announcements from governments to say what is opening up. And I know that there will be, if I was to look in a couple of days again on the visuals or the traffic search demands on certain routes within the Asia Pacific region, based on what's been announced in the last couple of days, we will again see these numbers grow. And it is the clever marketeers that are getting involved and talking and engaging with this audience that's coming, for example, onto our site and learning and wanting to know about what they can and how they can travel again to these destinations. So with that 1,770% lift, Air New Zealand and other partners got involved and wanted to put their message in front of this audience that was now very, very keen to be traveling again. So we've also seen that a lot of these partners who are working with us are therefore also grabbing market share and moving and progressing with the tourism business going forward. It is very opportunistic, and we need to play on these opportunistic moments as we find our way and navigate our way through the pandemic as we go forward. Rich, if we go to the next slide. What we understand, obviously, is your priorities are in fact our priorities. And as a digital advertising arm of Expedia and the publishing side of things, we understand that we need to capture demand and drive conversion. We have, as I said at the beginning, this audience that comes to our sites really quite interested, high intent to travel. They haven't necessarily made up their minds yet where they want to go and are looking for that inspiration. We've seen that lift by 24% since the pandemic as well. So it's important to capture that demand and drive conversion. In fact, we've continued to see that those numbers continue to rise on our sites over the period. Also looking for a greater budget efficiency, right? So we also understand that budgets have been constrained over the period. and finding ways of how we can get cooperation going. And I'll have one example in a second about that as well. We also understand from Rich's pointing out earlier on, it's like hygiene, and the messaging is so incredibly important. We're picking up all these from our traveler reviews, thousands and hundreds of thousands of reviews coming in. So we know what travelers are talking about and how to position and how to message. We have an in-house creative agency that only works on promoting destinations and everything to do with travel. So we know on a very precise point what the messaging, imagery, content should be. We know, for example, that it should be at least or travelers on average have 9 photos that they will look at prior to actually making a decision on a lodging, for example, right? So how important is content versus imagery as well. And this is all about these 300 petabytes, which I said we were going to explain, but I seem to be going through that on Richard's behalf. So, and then how can we demonstrate with reporting great impact of your marketing you're doing? What's the incremental lift that we are providing through our partnerships? So just to give a couple of examples, Richard, if we go to the next slide, of how we can do that, we work through, I'll go very quickly here. I mentioned this already, we're globally present in over 200 sites, Expedia, of course, but we are obviously got a few other brands in their portfolio, 200 around the world in different global places, 75 countries and 35 different languages. So we have that reach globally, both from an international perspective and also from a domestic. Throughout this pandemic, we also realized we have a very strong domestic offering and position in a lot of these countries globally. Rich, if we go to the next slide, and I'm starting to speed up now a little bit, is we also are able to provide a full funnel of suites and solutions around that, from the very high funnel inspiration right down to that bottom end, right? So, we have this very high performance product for hotel industry as well, which is a sort of an auction-based pricing model where hotels and lodgings can get themselves higher up on the lists as we drive that intent down that funnel. But very top line, again, if I go to the next, as an example of what we can achieve, very top line creative partnership. We have an in-house creative agency effectively dedicated only to working with destinations and the travel industry as a whole. That is their sole purpose, and they are at the cutting edge of utilizing technology, emerging technologies. We use facial recognition and certain kind of sound as a trigger. So they're very much at the cutting end. We work with many of you as well in this group in PATA, a lot of destinations in the past working around this type of technology, and it's a very high end part of it. But we also know that there is a need for cooperation. If we go to the next slide, Rich, just as a quick introduction, we work also to create a platform where cooperations can happen, and that means a cooperation either with an airline and a destination and lodgings, or just airlines, as we have done in the Pacific region before, or the Asian Pacific region before, bringing in North Americans to Asia with 3 Asian carriers, and allowing the Asian carriers then to, at that point when the consumers were on the landing page, to decide which of those destinations they wanted to get to. So cooperation is one way that basically what you're creating there are economies of scale for your dollar, and through working with our platform, reaching a very high intent audience at the same time. And I've just got one example at the back here, if I just go to it very quickly, which is a cooperative campaign that we did in EMEA, just to give you some examples of this. But you will find, obviously, with the link that Rich mentioned earlier on, you'll find this particular presentation, but you also find your way to other presentations and case studies for destinations marketing that we've done, utilizing, very importantly, the data that we have at our disposal, the insights we pull from that data, layered with third-party insights in terms of the intent behind that behavior, and then finding the most suitable ways to have you engage with that audience that is there to travel, and they want to return to travel, and they do, as we've seen from Richard's presentation, also want to return to the Asia Pacific region as well from different parts of the world. I think that's us for this morning. It's a bit quick, I do apologize, but I'll leave you with the key takeaways which I just mentioned, which is demand will continue to fluctuate. Let us get even more comfortable in that scenario and being flexible, and we work around flexibility, changing the market that we're looking at, changing the offering that we're looking at, the messaging that we're offering as well. The vaccine, but also travel bubbles, these two in parallel really are the main drivers at the moment in terms of how people react to demand. We've seen that with that Tasmanian, with 1,700% lift. Health and hygiene won't go away. It is now a precursor to any decision-making process for travelers, that they want to see that, whether it's in content or it's in imagery, they want to know that they are feeling very well looked after and confident in the destination and lodging choice they're making. And being visible to these prospective travelers throughout the pandemic and going forward is a must. Being dark, all that means is that you are out of mind, is out of sight, and therefore you fall off their list, of all of our lists. If I was to now think of where would I want to go in the next trip with my children, I have a short list, because there are a short list of what I know, and it's a short list of what I've seen. And if you don't appear on either of those two, you're already on a backward step. And it's about being in that visible space at this stage. I think that's it. I'll leave you with a link for while it's there, and then hand it over to our hosts. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, Richard. And I'm very pleased to hear that the travelers have the APAC as the destination in their bucket list. Very nice to hear. So without further delays, let me hand the floor to our MC today, Paul. Mr. Paul Bringat. Paul, are you there? Yeah.
Yes,
hi.
I'm here. Thank you very much,
Yes.
Oren. Well, thank you very much, Andrew and Richard. Really great presentation. And of course, thank you for all our delegates for joining us this afternoon. So, just want to remind anybody, if you have any questions for our panelists, please do submit them in the Q&A function. Don't use the chat function. It's a bit difficult for me to sort of look at both chat and Q at the same time. So questions, please do submit them in the Q&A section. We already got a couple here, but I'll start off with this first question. We've heard, in our discussions with a lot of webinars and a lot of our stakeholders, we're talking about, how travel behavior is changing. And you guys had also mentioned that beach destinations feature predominantly on your search. So does your research also show that, rural sort of destinations are more attractive to the consumers? And then what does that mean for cities? I mean, Richard or Andrew, can you answer that question?
Sure, I'll kick off and Richard jump in where you want. So actually, interestingly enough, again, I was presenting, as I say, yesterday in Europe at the Focus Right, and some of the data we've pulled from a very recent research into intent or intent behind behavior, which is done together with the Wakefield Research, a third-party company we've used, suggests that actually beach and city has come back with a stronger percentage than it was a year ago. So in early pandemic phase where, we all had that element of fear, what does this mean? You wanted to get away from crowds because it was, it's transmitted in close communities and close crowds. So therefore the immediate reaction is, okay, if I'm going to go somewhere, I'm going to go somewhere where there is no crowds. Ironically, in the UK, this is where everyone went to the mountains, and therefore there were too many crowds in the mountain regions. But anyway, another side story. The whole point being that actually now that the vaccine rollouts are happening, there is a return of confidence in the ability to travel to places that felt a little bit scary this time last year. And we're seeing that in the figures and the percentages. So that is why you're seeing beach. We all need the suntan as well in Europe for sure. And beach and cities are coming back on the fore. I think that confidence level is coming back, and it's reflecting in people's choices and decisions and where they want to go. Rich, I don't know if you...
Yeah, I just back that up, Andy, actually. And I think, last year when we were in the kind of the midst of the pandemic, the data that we saw around customers who were traveling very much, reinforces what you said, Paul, there about rural areas, near lakes, near water. And in fact, we saw destinations appearing in our top 10 searches for a point of sale that might not have usually appeared in those lists. But to Andy's point, we are seeing confidence return with vaccines and cities coming back, particularly actually in the US where vaccines are rolling out at a rapid rate.
And what about which segments do you see are strong? The family, or is it high end? Do you guys have any data about those kind of patterns of sectors that are sort of leading the way, or FITs?
I think, I mean, my feeling there on the data, very family oriented trips, and I think this is reinforced again in the vacation rental business that we've seen thriving in the last year. Family trips that are maybe longer than normal, or perhaps longer than what would have been done pre-pandemic. And then, as I mentioned as well, some of those trips involving a combination of leisure and work from home. So you might be booking a vacation rental, spending a couple of weeks in a destination, working some days, and then doing leisure on those other days. But I think, I can't, no data springs to mind now, but I think those travelers that travel frequently pre-pandemic were probably some of the first to get out when they could, when those announcements were made about borders opening.
Yeah, there is. I would add to that. There is some anecdotal evidence from campaigns that we're running in different parts of the world where we have these first movers. So those who are ready to travel straight away as soon as things open up. And funny enough, they don't necessarily belong to the vaccinated population at the time. So this millennial group, younger generation who are keen to just get back out there and have a higher degree of risk taking in that sense. And we saw that also, people who were just going to go and do it in some of the research that we're doing. Second to that is also is actually those empty nesters, or generation baby boomers is the one I'm looking for. Is that older generation who are also prepared to now travel. They're the first ones that have been vaccinated, and you see that. But to Richard's point, what we're seeing more is, so those two groups kind of moving a little bit, but it's where people are looking for their holidays and the trends are doing in terms of their lodging, and that's in family groups, vacation rentals going up. But at the same time, we're also seeing traditional resorts coming back in terms of the search and booking numbers for those as well throughout the world. Well, what isn't coming back as yet, but then I don't think that's rocket science, is business travel. So for us, it's just been pure domestic rebound, and that whole business side of things is going to take a little longer, obviously, to come back.
Well, I mean, all this is great to hear. I'm sure a lot of people are very excited to see sort of this data, and there's this sort of surge of travel that's sort of just starting to happen. So we have a lot of questions on the Q&A, so I'm just going to jump right into them. I want to make sure we get to all of them as much as possible. Feel free to please, anybody watching, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get to them. So the first here is from, is from Alex. I guess his question is your definition of search capturing all search types? So air, hotel, car rental, in destination?
Exactly, yes. And so what we were able to do last year is see searches by destination. So for what destination a customer's searching, the source of those searches, so the feeder markets, and then what those customers were searching for. And to the question, air, hotel, package, car rental, cruise were all included within that data set. We're also able to see the search window, for when customers were searching. And as you probably would have seen in some of our other presentations and data, the search window really compressed last year, much shorter than what we would typically see. But yes to the question.
Okay. All right. Let's just jump right to the next question. So, I guess travel confidence has always been something that's concern from a lot of stakeholders. So this is from Akriti. What marketing strategies are being adopted by Expedia Group to encourage people to travel again?
I'll touch on that one. So it's interesting. It's a good question. So we are, as Expedia Group, just in the same position as the travel industry as a whole, obviously. So Expedia sort of looked at the globe and prioritized where they're going to spend their advertising dollar in a phased approach, as you would imagine. So looking at the trend. So that's why these 300 petabytes are it's no joke. We use that very, very closely to understand what the consumer is planning to do or where the trends are coming. And we therefore utilize that to also inform our own marketing strategy. So therefore, where do we up investment, where do we lower investment for the time being in order to capture that market? That's what I was saying at the beginning. It's a very dynamic world and opportunistic. And we all have to act in on this as well in terms of, utilizing the opportunities where they arise. So the flexibility is two-way, and I'll now move to how we work with our partners to create that flexibility. And that is, the best approach is to have a strategy which is not just single market focus. So if you have it's better to have 2 or 3 key markets you want to go after with a longer tail of secondary markets, and be prepared to shift from one to the other as things change. So if your mind is set on, I want the Malaysian market, or I want the Australian market, and things change, be ready in order to adapt to the change that's coming. So start already understanding, what does secondary markets potentially look for, like for my destination, and build a plan around that as well. You may not have to, effectuate it. You may not have to put it into practice, but it's there in case you need to, in order to pick up the market, because otherwise you just become the stop-start strategies are not working for a lot of destinations. You need to have a rolling, flexible approach. But from Expedia's point of view, similar approach is, where can we make a difference right now in order to drive business back to our platforms?
And this is a question here. I'm going to jump to this other question here because that kind of follows in the same what you were talking about. This is from an anonymous attendee. So looking at Malaysia, which has a national lockdown in place, how would you continue to drive conversations on travel and push travel content without appearing tone deaf?
It's a very, 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 very good question, in fact, and we've gone around this over the last years. The fact is, it's not tone deaf in terms of the approach and the messaging you're putting out there, right? And a lot of destinations over the last 12 months have been very good at this, and they talk about when travel, don't come back yet now, stay home, stay safe when it comes back, and therefore it's a narrative around, the destinations here, it's waiting for you for when it is safe to come back. That is not tone deaf. That's actually being very receptive to what people are wanting, and that's to travel and understand where to travel to, but respecting the fact there is legislation in place, there is safety concerns in place. So it's not saying, hey, come, it's don't come just yet, but when it's back and it's safe to do so, we're here for you. And that's a very clever approach, because if those destinations are not doing that, or not visible, to my point earlier on, you drop off people. We can only hold so much information in our heads. You drop off that list of top 5 places I want to go to, and people will go, and they do want to travel. It is about that narrative, and it's not about, hey, you should come now, you should come here. It's about, we're ready for you when it's safe to do so, when it's the right time to do so.
So kind of inspirational, right? Just make sure that, keep it inspirational, keep it top of the mind, and then when it's ready, then you start pushing out, welcome back sort of messaging.
Absolutely. I think I saw one recently saying, this is what you've been missing. We've been missing. I think the message was, we've missed you. We've been missing you. We cannot wait to welcome you back. And these are sort of, very powerful emotional things that are reaching out to people to come back to that, although they know they can't go just yet. So that's, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I remember seeing Thailand doing a "We Miss You" video. So, but I'm sure now that's changed with the Phuket Sandbox. It's not like welcome you, but I guess that's something where you can sort of look at as an example. So I'm going to go back to an earlier question here. There was a slide, I guess, talking about composition of where they're getting their source of information from. So I think you said it was 50% OTA, 30% direct, and 20% agents. Was that correct, or do you want to go back to that slide?
That was booking. Yeah, no, the slide that I showed you was 24% lift in terms of using OTAs for inspiration, and then a 24% growth 24% for OTAs, 16% for DMOs, so destination management organizations. So they've seen a lift as well, and people going to their sites to find that inspiration for travel. And then there was a further 16% that actually travel advertising was speaking to them, and actually they use that for the inspiration. The other numbers I was referring to, which were 50%. So of bookings made right now, 50% of bookings are being made on OTAs, 33% are direct, and a 17% of the market is through your traditional high street travel agencies. And this is what is the research is giving us. And my point was, with a partner such as ourselves, we have a program which is called TAP, TAAP, and this is very much working with 100,000 high street agencies around the world in terms of providing them with the inventory, providing with the technology so that they can make these bookings. And we have a program where we actually do drive educational programs through these agencies as well. So it's kind of a 360 approach that we have, B2C and B2B as well. But yeah, it was just to give it a context of what we're seeing currently.
But I mean, just to follow up on that, do you think that trend will continue? I mean, will it be more digital and travel agents will kind of get lessened in the future, or will it sort of even out sort of to the pre-pandemic proportions?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul. I think the time will tell, of course, but and also regions of the world will be different. But there is also still an element of look online and book offline. That is in certain markets, and that will continue and that will change as well. And a lot of these travel agencies are very online savvy, so they're basically doing the work that a consumer may not wish to do themselves in a virtual world or otherwise, but it's still very much utilizing, for example, our technology. So they're just stepping into an Expedia site for travel agents, which we would probably as consumers, as independent FITs do ourselves. They're just asking a travel agent to do that. So the technology is the same. It's just who's doing it for you. Christ, I would love it if somebody else would do my holiday bookings every time I was going to go, but it doesn't happen. But it's a little bit. So I think there's going to be changes everywhere. We just need to see how they change and how those. And I can't predict what that looks like. I don't think many people will, because we still are in a very volatile and dynamic period. But it's watching what happens, and that's why I think the old normal will change and has changed.
Yeah, I mean, this is just sort of kind of a bit off that question as well, because with different regions you have various travel protocols, right? So one could assume like, oh, travel agents may be more helpful in the future because they can help you navigate the various travel protocols around let's say Asia Pacific or even Southeast Asia, if you want to do more than one destination stop. Does Expedia have that also like on their site? Like if you go to a listing, does it show you like the travel protocols for that destination?
Yes, we do. It's actually working in cooperation with a company called Sherpa. So we have that on our site. So when consumers come to our site, they're able to see, okay, look, I'm going to go to this country. What do I? And it's not just what's that country inbound, but where am I coming from? So again, you have that. It's a two-sided coin, right? So it's where you're coming from and where you're going to. There are policies around both sides of that. So it's where am I coming from? Where am I going to? You can put that into the tool on our site, and it'll list the protocols, the restrictions, the quarantines, whatever you need to do at that point. So yes, it's embedded into our platforms.
Okay, all right. Let's jump to another question from the audience here. This is everyone keeps asking this question, but I'll pose it to you, to both of you as well. When do you expect global travel demand to bounce back?
Rich, do you want to take this one?
Well, I think it's yeah. I mean, it's been bouncing back in patches throughout the last almost 18 months now. I think one of the initial slides we showed was a Q1 story, and it was up and down based on different announcements and changes in travel protocol. But the story last year, the summer, we saw a significant jump in search demand and bookings for all regions as confidence started to grow. It then dipped, of course, as most of you know, in the kind of autumn and winter. But I think there's certainly been examples throughout the last year where global travels come back. And I think to reference an earlier slide, vaccines is the key. Once every country is solid on their vaccine rollout, that will instill greater confidence in travel. And then, when the entire world is vaccinated, whenever that may be, then hopefully that is then the most fertile time for travel to bounce back in full force.
I was just going to add to that. There's two ways of looking at this question as well, by the way, is when is travel going to rebound? I think it's ready to rebound to Richard's point, pretty soon. It is whether it's capable of rebounding, being able to, right? So this is government legislations, how, that's what's to a great extent is also determining when it will rebound. So is the potential for rebound there? Yes. Can it rebound? Those are factors outside of our control, airlines controls, etc. It's something which is still, well, you can influence, and that's why we're working with the UNWTO and we're working with ETC, we're working with you as well, as to how can we work as an industry, as making a bigger fist to make that impact, to say, hey, how do we shift legislation along at the right pace? So it's a two-sided question to a certain extent.
Yeah, and just quickly as well, just on the slide that I shared earlier about the US market. Now, that US market is a strong feeder market for us, and I think seeing APAC and MEA appear on those search trends is a good indicator that when people are vaccinated, they want to travel, and they want to travel long haul and not just within the confines of their country.
Right. And then, Andrew, you're talking about government regulations, and Richard was talking about vaccines. So I'm going to jump to this question here. Like, do you think a travel pass, a COVID-19 negative certificate, will be required to travel? And if it is, what will be the consequences for travelers and agents? This is from Datu Dangavelu, the president of the Malaysian Indian Tour and Travel Association.
Yeah, look, I mean, from our perspective as Expedia Group, we support the legislation that gets put in. Our main priority is to bring back travel safely and the right pace into the different parts of the world. So we will support whatever policies are put in place by governments and legislation, and we will help them make decisions with data that we can provide and the insights that we can provide. But we don't have per se a philosophy ourselves in terms of what is the right way to do so, and this is something which is is being discussed obviously at governmental level. But as my point is, we will support that around the world where that is applicable.
All right, let's see. Okay, so this question here. So what about the situation in South Asia and destinations like Sri Lanka? Are there some sort of travel seeking to these destinations in markets? I guess, are people looking at destinations like in South Asia currently from your data?
I suspect that we would be seeing that. I mean, we can see any destination globally, and we can identify from which source markets customers are searching. So I think that's something we can probably follow up on after this call, if the person that's asked the question can reach out, and we can be a bit more specific on the answer.
Okay. All right. I think we're running out of time, so I'll leave just with one final question here. So, we heard a lot about what you guys do, but then how does Expedia's offerings, how does it differ from, I guess, other players in the market, and how can what are you guys doing that are different to help the industry as opposed to other players?
I think it's the industry as a whole has a job here, whether it's ourselves or our competitors. It's about working together to get that back on the road. We all have a role to play in that, and working with different foundations and governments around the world. We all have to lift up on that. The differentiation in terms of the B2C side of things, in terms of what does Expedia offer that's different to our competitors, I would probably make that succinct and just saying, we're a one-stop shop for travel, whether it's domestic, whether it's international, from your flight to your attraction, to your experience, to your accommodation, to your car rental, it's all there, and it's very dynamic. So that's a little bit different to a lot of our competitors who either focus on one area of that part, whether it's lodging or it's air only, or it's combination one or two. But yeah, I would say it's a one-stop shop. That's just more specific when we talk about who we are as a service provider to the consumer. As I mentioned, we all have lift, and we all work together as an industry as a whole to bring it back. The final one I would say is like what differentiates us, and that was specific around Expedia Media Solutions, is the fact that we are able to provide you, our partners, effectively with the insights, the data, the trends that information that's coming from these hundreds of millions of searches from travelers around the world for destinations. And that's why Richard just mentioned a point, for a very specific question, let us go and have a look at that for you, because we can provide you, and very often who you think your competitor might be isn't actually a competitor because they're searching against 2 other things. So we can be very precise in the data we provide our partners. We don't sell our data, incidentally, we provide it to our partners who are working with us. And it's about that engagement and getting in front of a traveler. So very loosely put, it's up to you, the industry itself, is where do you want to invest? Where do you want to how do you want to attract your audience? Is that at a high up funnel where there may or may not be interest for travel? Or is it talking to an audience that we know is interested in travel and getting further down the funnel on that, and then being inspiring at that point? So I would say that sets us a little bit apart from the rest, is we're able to, with our first party data, incidentally as well, is unique to us, we don't sell it, is that we can engage with that audience on behalf of our partners and make sure that we are driving the incremental business back to your destinations.
Want to add anything else, Richard?
Just to reinforce Andy's point there about data and insights, and I think really in the last year, operating as that consultant for what's been happening in the industry, what's been happening at Expedia Group, has been vital, and I've seen that differentiate ourselves in the market.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew and Richard. And if you guys want to know more about Expedia and how they can help you, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to download the trend report. We actually put it in the chat, so the link is there, or you actually see it on the screen as well. So once again, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Richard. And I will pass this back to my colleague, Oren, to close it out. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thanks.
Over to you, Oren.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, I'm just wait for the quick. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to Expedia. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, everybody, for staying with us on the webinar. And thank you for your participation. And as Paul mentioned, if you have any question, please feel free to reach out to us at membership@pada.org, or any question about Expedia. We're happy to connect you with them as well. Yes, and
thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and I would like to highlight this. Please don't forget to mark your calendar for our upcoming webinar, Emerge Stronger: How Sustainable and Lead Profitability. Yes, and this we're working together with SSBC, Guava, and Kocher. And the webinar will take place on June 24th, 4 p.m. Bangkok ICT time. So please don't forget. More information can be found on Pada website. And the next slide, please. And if you haven't submitted to Pada Go Award, please do so. We extend the deadline up until June 28th. So please do and reach out to us if you haven't, and any information that you need, please send an email to goaward@pada.org. And the Go Award ceremony will take place on September 8th. Thank you. And this is just recently launched. We just launched our issue and trend. We are working together with TCI Research. So it's available on Pada store. If you are Pada member, this is free publication for you to download. So, and if you haven't applied for Pada membership, please feel free to reach out to us. Any more information? Yes, again, membership@pada.org. I am Sarudani Sawang. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ